Tonight marks the night of some special journey for me. This is a 26-year journey, believe it or not. Some of you perhaps just found out about the fact I wrote this book in the last week or month, but this journey goes back to 1996, believe it or not. There he is. You can probably guess who that little guy is that he's holding. It probably goes back further than 1996 because at its core, it is a special bond between a grandson and a grandfather. It's something I attempted to portray between two protagonists, but which I drew from my own relationship with my grandfather, William Minor. You could say the seeds were planted when I was a child. So get to 1996. I've just graduated from Mississippi State. And it's the summer. It's the summer. And, we used to have all these conversations, and he's an older guy. And I didn't know about these stories. And one day he shows me this manuscript, and that's a photocopy of a bunch of paper. And he goes, I want to tell you about some stuff. I'm like, what are you talking about? You always think about your grandfather in this older age. You don't think about your grandfather like 20 to 30 years old. And he lays out this stuff. It's 12 pages of notes. Really neatly written. I think Angelique was quite taken by his handwriting. And he's laid out a chapter of his life. And I'm like, what is this? He goes, well, it's my story. And man, I'd love to tell it. I'm clueless 22, 23-year-old. I don't know what to do with this. But I'm like, I'm kind of a creative guy. People know I'm a creative guy. I'm like, I can't help you write a book. I don't have time. I got to report to Washington, D.C. in a few months. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do next? Well, the task. So I said, well, I know what I can do. I got a 1996 JVC cassette recorder. And I can go to Radio Shack and buy a mic, and maybe you can just tell me the stories. We'll at least get that part taken care of, and maybe we'll come back to the book. And so he's like, well, I think that might work out kind of good. I'm like, okay, so let's go do that. So, I went down to Radio Shack, and I got the mic, and I came back there. And so it began, kind of busy as a young guy, just graduated from college. I'm in Memphis. There's a lot of going out, all that fun stuff. But, I made time, and I kind of lived there with them that summer. And between homes, and lived with my grandmother and others, my mom, and we just lived there at the house, and we would just go back in the back room, and I would just, hey, you want to do some recording today? Like, no problem. So we got 6 hours, which is a lot, and just to tell you and describe it, this, at first I tried to, be Walter Cronkite and kind of lead him on. And soon it became clear that this guy had a story to tell, and I just needed to sit back and just be an audio tech and just hit record. He could just take care of its own, and I quickly just learned just to let him go. Next slide. And it's funny, the last page of it, it's fun. I just point out, he goes, I got married. Actually, he had a little bit of a sense of I'm going to write the next chapter. I'm going to scratch that out. What the hell? I got married in the fun. That would have been about the time he was 28, to put it in a timing perspective of his life. So he pretty much wanted to cut the novel out when he got married at around 28. Next slide, please. All right, so there we are, 2002. He had a stroke the year after I recorded him, and he couldn't speak. And I didn't think about that till yesterday. And I was like, you know what, that's pretty damn lucky to hear his voice. And that's really special. But he could still hang out and have a good time, and you could read his eyes. And he'd shake his head, he could enunciate. He did really well, and that's in 2002.
That's your dad's house?
That's my dad's house. Next slide, please. And then, we'll get into how this book came along, but I just got to share this great picture, because it's not only 3 generations with Maxwell, but we all look like kids. Even I look like a kid. If you can't tell in that photo, it's like the sheer joy of that. It's just awesome. Next slide. And then there's a nice photo when you get Christina in there, and there's my brother. Some of you met him to the left of my grandfather. There's me, and there's my mother, and there's my grandma Rosetta, his wife. Okay, so next slide. So he passes away in 2007. And I'm like, I've got these cassette tapes I've been carrying around. Jim Ketter's here from afar. Thanks for coming, Jim. Jim remembers when I lived with Jim in, off Lorcom Lane down near downtown, and I had these tapes, and I was like guarding these cassette tapes with my life. I had recorded them to a Microsoft Wave format for geeks out there, and like, because I did figure the analog might wear down over time. I had recorded them, but I never edited them. So then I started splicing them and like trying to figure out where I could break the chapters to make logical sense, so they could be like listening to a CD or listening to like a series of songs and with the logical conclusion and beginning. And then there'd be parts where somebody's coughing, or my grandma would come in and go, "Boys, the spaghetti's ready. You guys got it." Like, well, I don't want to put that in there. As much as great to hear her voice, I had to do all this processing. So I worked on that from like 2007, and I just kind of, it came and went because life is busy. We got kids, we got my own life, and it took a long time because it would take literally a week per track, and there's 100 of them. And just to really put those headphones on, take me out, denoising, despeckle them, Dolby noise reduction, all of these procedures. It was an audiophile's dream, but it got really weary. Slide, please. But I wasn't done, and I was able to do this slide a little bit, a lot of time today on this thing. And I was like, I'm going to go back and find it. And what happened was around 2019, I'm like, I've got these audio things done. What do I do next? I think a book should happen. I think a story needs to be told. And I found Mark Graham Communications. We've been discussing maybe there could be a book. I needed a consultant. Like everything else I do, I like to bring some expertise. And he's like, "I think I got somebody you need to meet." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Kara Lopez Lee, and this is the intro." So I think it's kind of nice. Kara, nice to meet you. Invite coming, short for I'm going to send you an invite. We're going to talk about things. Thank you, gentlemen. I was able to open the files. This is some of the files. I've listened to a few already. Your grandfather was so delightful. Your project sounds like a kick. I look forward to discussing with you, and so on and so on. So she's a huge chapter of this. She's obviously a co-author. She started out as a ghostwriter. A lot of people have them. And I needed help. I needed help with the structure. I needed help with good logical thinking, what novels are about. And she helped me fill in a lot of dialogue where I was empty and her gas tank was full, and vice versa. It was only later that she asked if she could be on the book itself, and I was like, "You deserve it. Bring you up there." Otherwise, she would have never been really known. But I thought in my heart that's the right thing to do. She's been special. Next slide, please. So once I got her, next slide, I said, "Hey, let's go meet at the Peabody because I want to be immersive." This is a place in Memphis. If you've ever been to this hotel, it's special. That's where they met. That's where my grandparents met. That is also where they had their honeymoon. And it's a great place every time I go there. Even Rick, we've been down there, and some of the guys, we've been down there, and we got these. We've gone down there and gotten suits there. You get the Elvis suits, and all this kind of fun stuff. We spent time with my Uncle Bill. We went through the story. We started thinking about how this could be done. I wanted to get ideas with my mother. And you know what's interesting about this date? 8th, 9th. You know what happens on January 10th? WHO announces a COVID outbreak in Wuhan, China. Yeah. I'm not sure how long, I think travel stopped like by March, but we were there and it wasn't even on our mind. Thank God. All right, next slide. All right, so one of the things we decided to do is like, well, how do we approach this amazing story? I've got all this great content recorded. We had transcribed it to text. I paid somebody to do that, so we'd have it in words. And I'm like, well, do we do a novel? Do we do a thriller? Do we do fantasy? And Karen and I worked on like the opening. We literally wrote 2 pages of how each of these things might look. We kicked it around, and I'm like, I don't know about fantasy. I don't know about thriller, but I kind of like the novel idea because I can't interview anymore. I can't do a biography because I can't fill in the gaps. I can't fill in the conversation. I can't get the details. So if I'm going to get stuff wrong, I might as well get it wrong pretty good and fill in and color in the lines and make it, and I can establish his friends in the novel that stay with him for the duration of the novel and things like that you can get creative about without worrying if I got it wrong. So it became a novel. And we decided on that. Next slide, please. Around 2021, I was able to finish uploading all of the audio tracks into SoundCloud. Who here knows SoundCloud? It's a free advert. Okay, good. Well, it's for free and it's available on SoundCloud. You can listen to his very voice, and I get a chance to play it. We'll briefly play a track. And I put them up there, and talk to attorneys of copyright. It's just up there for people to enjoy. And I was able to kind of figure out what photos I wanted for each thing, and they're organized in albums and so forth. And I'll make sure you all have a link to it. And I just checked yesterday. It's not blazing, but it's just really cool. It's been listened to at least 1,261 times, and it's funny because Memphis rules the roost. Great Falls, number 2. Violet, whatever that is. West Bend, Slinger, Jackson, Mississippi, Annandale. I believe that might be Annika. Countries, United States, Canada, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. So not a lot of plays, but it's fun to think in this modern age that people can hear it for themselves, and it's permanent. So it could be up there for 100 years. Let's see what happens. Yeah. So decisions time, right? It's like, how do you really? Now we're going to do a historical novel. What do we do next? Next slide. All right. So let's talk about this. Man, it's been a long time since English Lit in high school. You remember the hero's journey? You have this, some challenge, the failure, and you got to overcome it. And these are recipes, tried and true, that make it. That's why we get addicted to a show. Like, we want to see what happens next. It's not magic. It's usually the same kind of thing that people get excited about. And then the instruments and symbolism. That rifle on the right, that British Lee Enfield 303 Jungle Carbine rifle, is actually a picture of the rifle he was able to keep from World War II. And Angelique's son Blake has this rifle. I said, take a picture of it. I want to see it again. Guns it's a very provocative topic. To control them, how they can be used to protect, how the Ukrainians, for example, can use them to protect their nation. How they can be used for not good, obviously, but it's a good representation of something that we can kind of use as an instrument throughout the book, and it does appear in the book. And then we thought, I'll bring that into the book, and it's like his dad's gun in the story and how that works, and there's a very early experience with that, and you can see the rifle, chapter 2, right early on. There's the rifle, and that stays in there. And I'm not going to obviously solve your mysteries tonight, but this is enough to, or maybe you'll actually get to chapter 2. And then relevant topics. I ran out of space, and I think, Bill, you added some stuff, about courage and other things, but every one of these things happens. You're like, how in the hell does this happen? I mean, adventure, misadventure, romance and love. There's music, songs, there's war, violence. There's racism, anti-Semitism, tackling some tough issues that that we were able to bring to life. Injury, there were drugs. There's mystery, innocence, perseverance, justice, luck, kindness and gratitude, and really acceptance. It's all in there. It may just be in there for a paragraph. It might be in there for a page out of the 451. But it's in there because he comes across so many people, and there's so many things to have to deal with that we can kind of weave this into the story. It is really not only the grandson journey and the grandfather's journey, but I think a journey of the human experience. Next slide, please. Like I said, we converted everything to text, and every time we did that, we were able to lay that into the next chapter. Let's just take his raw voice into text and lay that in there so we can see it coming. And how we're going to use some of that, we actually didn't use it all. We got towards the end, and we actually got rid of a couple of chapters we thought was too long. It was originally 8.5 by 11. Like, well, when we go to publish, it's going to become a 6 by 9 format. And it didn't blossom. We had 325 pages, but at 6 by 9, it's 450. And we cut stuff. We cut out a war crime, and it's a horrible war crime, and you can hear the story of it. But he heard it recounted to him by an Air Force person, and we thought it's not good to hear. It doesn't do anything for the book, and it wasn't really relevant, so we cut that out and some other stuff. Timeline structure, just to tease you a little bit. So they meet in the summer of 1998. Dylan has gone through his made-up name. We just liked how it sounded. He came to Memphis. He's got some trouble. He's dealing with some issues. Just lost a friend. He's going through some tough times, and his grandfather's there to receive him. And it got the troubled kid for the summer, right? But I needed stuff to happen with the grandson. I wanted people to relate to him, and I wanted people to then appreciate the power of a great grandfather. So I needed that to happen, and they come together in the summer of 1998. He's just 17, coming on 18, and he's got all kinds of problems. But Will Miner's stories, the true stories he told me about his life, are then recounted to him throughout this summer together, where they both have. It turns out he has to heal too. He's got trouble. Yeah, he's got some wounds. You know, PTSD, stuff like that happens, and they never talked about it back then, but it happens. And we had to come up with some artifacts about time slicing. So what you see here, again, the summer of 1998, and then 1936, we went back in the novel thinking, when you're reading it, it's easy to see when they're kind of jumping back and forth in time, and he's telling his grandson these stories, but we'll make it a little easier for the reader not to have to think about, I think I'm in 1936 again, or 1945. So we added this time element. Some people think that's pretty unique. I've not seen it. Well, if it's happened, certainly I didn't borrow the idea from anybody else. We had to come up with something that would work. And if this ever goes into movie, it'll be obvious when they change scenes, right? It'll kind of use some kind of color scheme or something to go in the past. Just a couple more stories here on the Germantown Commissary. Yeah. People have been to Memphis.
Get in there.
Yeah. Well, you know, I just wanted examples of like things that happen, and you know, there's a really great scene, and it's like where they're sitting, the grandfather and grandson, which I used to do with him, eating there, and then the train would come by, and I'm able to paint that story. It's in the book. So sometimes like you think, well, it's not stories he told me, but my experience with him, and I brought them to life, and I just, you know, you'll know when you see it. It might look like a simple place. There's a rule: if the restaurant doesn't look that great, the food's probably pretty good, especially if it's a barbecue joint in Memphis. All right, next slide. All right, so what are you going to do for dedication? And I was like, well, I'll do it. I'll dedicate to grandparents, because it's a story about grandparents and great-grandparents. Being just wonderful grandparents. Unfortunately, I never got to meet the ones on the right, Roy and Bernalyn. They were deceased before I was born, but as my dedication up front says, I think Will and Rosetta did the work of two. They basically said, hey, I'll be there. I'll be your grandparents, which is special. Someplace. All right, so victory is getting this thing down, right? Getting it down. And so now I'm just going to talk a little about, let's give you some teasers about the book. There's this unbelievable stuff that this young Will Miner went through. One thing, he joined the circus. Did he have anything else to do? And there's a character, he's like told him about a girlfriend in the circus. I'm like, well, you know, as we're writing this book, and Kara's attention to detail, we did historical research, which, believe it or not, on Google, that's the girlfriend.
I didn't even know that.
Maxine Musselman Fisher. And so I can go to, like, you know, they have these dedication sites, and I'm like, your grandmother might have dated my grandfather, but I hadn't really say that yet. But there's a lot of real people that I could bring to light with this book. Next slide. Okay, there's a scene, there's literally a story where it's like, his buddy Jack Prather, that's Google today, Jack Prather's like, hey, Bill, you know, we take the bomber, the B-24, from Naples to Foggia. There's a dance there we can attend. It's in the middle of World War II. It's like, we're going to borrow this U.S. government asset, B-24 Liberator. We're going to fly a bunch of nurses to a dance in Foggia. I'm out of town. I might mess that up. And they did it. And I'm like, tell me a story. And I looked up Jack Prather and Prather's Panthers. That's the plane. And there's the captain up there. That was his buddy. good, I mean, I'm sure he was a social guy, you know. That's him. What a good-looking man. And, you know, he was a motor pool guy, so he's logistics. He, you know, wasn't really on the front, making sure everybody had the Jeeps, they had the ammo, everything they needed. LCI landing crafts, he's involved in that. Well, everybody knows about D-Day. Everybody knows about Normandy. But he was Operation Dragoon. Now, this is important because in August 1944, commanders-in-chief said, we got to take pressure off northern France, where we had landed. In June, we need to do something from the south. And you remember the old hammer and anvil? Well, this was the Operation Anvil, and Normandy was the hammer. But things got delayed, and they couldn't execute the pincher movement like they wanted to, but this did happen, and he was a part of that, and that's some pictures from that. There's a scene. It wasn't light. Look how many people died. 7,000 killed, more than 10,000, 15,000 casualties. It was no walk in the park, but it was so significant, over 131,000 captured Germans. Okay, 159,000 German casualties. That's a big deal. There's a scene in there where they were actually in the boat, landing craft, and they're like the second day, and Germans able to get some planes coming in, and they start dropping bombs, and his friend looks at Bill and he's like, Bill, I think they're trying to kill us. He's like, I think you're right. And the bomb hit the ship next to him, blew it up. All those people gone. They just dealing with it and trying to move on. Keep going, pressing forward. All right, so a couple of stories. The Battle of Los Angeles actually occurred because after Pearl Harbor, everybody's freaking out about the impending doom on the West Coast, and you'll have to read about it on Wikipedia more or less, but there was a false air raid, and they shot weapons in the sky for hours thinking there was a bunch of Japanese planes. It turned out to be a false alarm. But they rained down ammo everywhere, and he was in that. He got a cake from Lucille Ball. Because he was sent to Hollywood to make some movies for a couple of weeks on a special duty, and they wanted some real GIs in there, and she finds out about his birthday, and she sends him a cake, and legend has it she had a crush on him.
She gave him some champagne too.
Yeah, oh yeah. Route 66 in the 1930s. Las Vegas was just a shack. He hoboed on the railroad to get back from California back to his hometown. And he had to ride the roof of a train because there was no Uber, there was no cab, there was nothing, and they basically were hijacking trains to get back and laying on the roof. He walked a pregnant high school girl down the aisle because she asked him. And back then, I guess you had to have somebody walk you down the aisle, and she goes, you know, she ended up marrying their boyfriend, but he wasn't around at the time as a college kid. He's like, would you walk me to get my diploma? He said, sure, I'll do it. And that's in the audio tape you want to listen to. He's a good soul. Helped the cadet make it through boot camp, not quitting. He's like, man, this guy's done 4 miles. I can't imagine, or 10 miles. He's got 1 more mile, and this guy's like, I can't do it. He's like, don't worry, I got you. He took his backpack, which was another 40 pounds, took both of them and made it across so the guy didn't have to carry a pack. And this train thing happens everywhere. This train allegory, which is on the cover, happens all over. He's on trains left and right. That was a big mode of transportation. Multiple amphibious campaigns. He's on these boats. These boats are real. I'm going to ask Christina, see if you can click that SoundCloud link real quick. We'll see if we can hear him well enough, just for a few minutes.
Where the telephone cable across the Pacific Ocean came up out of the water on the Pacific coast was a great big steel box right on the bank, on the shore. And this thing held the only communication they had at the time with Hawaii, with Pearl Harbor. So they sent us down there to guard it against sabotage. Because if they blew that up, radio communication wasn't as good as it is now, you know.
But I wanted you to hear his voice a little bit, plus I'm probably running a little bit late. Now, what he's talking about is this steel box that was the anchor point for an underwater cable that went to Hawaii. And it was the only form of communicating with Hawaii after Pearl Harbor. So they sent him down there and said, you got to protect this thing. Because if it's sabotage, there's no satellite comms, there's none of that, right, back then. And he was down there bivouacked with like 6 guys for 3 weeks till they were relieved, and you'll just, well, I wish I could play it for you. It's about 3, that one's like 3 minutes, okay, it's on SoundCloud. And a boat ends up coming in, and he's like, his orders were to shoot. If a boat comes, he's like, he was the guy that loaded the tracer bullet to shoot at that boat, shoot across the bow, and he said that boat turned around and never came back. And he called up the CP with the like local radio telephones they had, like, that's good, Bill Miner. If that boat comes again, you shoot the son of a bitch. So, because it never came back, so that's a good thing. But there's that gun in the story, and and a gun theme in the story. Wanted to kind of keep that going. Next slide, please. This is just regret to inform you that your son has been hospitalized. So he was in a recon outfit, and a mortar went off near him, and he lost full hearing in one ear, and he was pretty knocked out back then. He was behind a wall, so that was good, but a German mortar outfit that they just didn't see coming on the other side of the barn house basically launched that mortar over and pretty much knocked him out. It was pretty much the end of, well, they thought he could get him back in, but ultimately found him unfit for duty because he couldn't hear, and it shook him up. Next slide. All right, so I actually thought I'd, make it easy to find the link. So I created minerstories.com real fast, and it's just a one-page website, and there's a link to the Amazon, and there's also a link to the SoundCloud on minerstories.com, and it's just something that'll be parked up there forever, I suppose. And if there's anything you do, I just certainly would appreciate it. If you like the book, write a review, or repost it, or share the news, or tell a neighbor, or give, whatever it might be to get the word out. There's him as a kid in like first grade, so it's pretty cute to have these old photos that we're able to find. And so now, as my last piece, I get to read a few pages, if you'll bear with me for my last thing, and then and that'll be it. I'll answer some questions, and if you didn't get a signed copy, I'll stay here till everybody's got their copy, and again, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. So I struggle with what to read. I worked on it like, what am I going to read? There's so many, in my view, I was torn with all the different choices I had, and I was like, what would be kind of colorful? So I thought I'd go back to the railroad, and I thought I'd go back to a scene in the middle of a chapter where he's telling his grandson about the experience catching a ride on a railroad trains back to home. Some men rode the rails under the cars or between the cars, and some broke into the cars. Thomas and I agreed it felt safest to ride on top. Bottom and top could both be deadly. Sometimes cruel brakemen would lower a big pig iron pin and drag it under the train, where it would slam up and down and give any hobo down there a wicked beating. But on top, there was a risk of getting bounced off or freezing on cold nights. We couldn't risk falling asleep. Still, it seemed the best place to avoid being cornered, trapped, or beaten up by the train, its contents, or its angry employees. And we hoped we were fit enough to scramble down and jump off if necessary. That was the most uncomfortable ride I've ever taken, be it train, plane, car, or boat. See, we had to lie down on the boxcar, couldn't stand, couldn't sit, and couldn't face the direction we were going either because smoke blew from the stack, and if we faced that way, it would choke us and make us blind. We got smoke in our eyes anyway. Ooh-wee, that smarted. Nonetheless, what a sight, lying there watching the blue sky and endless autumn fields of old California and spool behind us. The train was too loud for talking except the occasional shout of something like, well, if this ain't the craziest stunt ever. Sometimes we grinned for a couple of days anyway. First stop was only a few hours north, a tiny desert town that was no more than a wide spot in the middle of nowhere, with the Union Pacific coaling watering station, a cheap hotel, and a couple of cafes. Las Vegas, Nevada. That's right, back then it was nothing. I was nervous about railroad cops, so we jumped off before the others. Way too soon, and luckily we didn't break anything. Once the train recoupled and started north, we jumped back on, bound for Salt Lake. Things got rough from there. riding one bum squat to the next, no water, no cleaning facilities, no sanitation, no money. You eat what you can scare up. You're at the mercy of society. Somewhere in Utah, I told Thomas I had this uneasy feeling we were being followed. He assured me I must be hallucinating from lack of sleep. So then I go back to summer of 1998. Dylan was struggling to picture Grandpa as a 20-year-old buddy you can spare a dime hobo when the old man's story was interrupted by flashing red lights outside the window. A freight train was coming. They sat mesmerized by the crossing bars, slowly lowering at the railroad crossing while two drivers shot the gap to avoid the wait. The approaching train horn blew louder and louder until two lead engines shot past with deafening roar. The building shook, rattling Dylan's bones as he bobbled his head in time with the clack of the wheels and counted the cars. He lost track at 39. The train's end still nowhere in sight. He wondered how many tons each car carried, how much horsepower it took to pull them. He pictured Will, 62 years younger, lying atop one of those cars, staring up at the thick blue sky. Dylan and Will didn't speak until the last boxcar vanished and silence sucked at Dylan's eardrums. Usually when they ate at the Germantown commissary and saw a train pass through, Will gave Dylan a big fat grin and offered to split a beer, like they'd seen a sight worth celebrating. Just one beer between men, they'd say. This time, Will only gave a wistful smile inside.